The Grenada Revolution that took power in 1979, for example, is this forgotten blip for many North Americans. But in the Caribbean, it was one of, like with the Chileans in 1970 under Salvador Allende's Popular Unity Coalition, the Grenada Revolution was one of the great what ifs of the region. Grenada is a tiny country of just over 100,000 citizens, tiny, and they too enacted a democratic socialist revolution that was attempting to educate its population and to create socialism through tourism, which is fascinating. The idea of turning this what was perceived by many tourists as an island paradise into a place that was about more than serving tourists, right? That tourists could come and be welcomed by a society that was living with dignity. People from all over, Black leaders in particular, from all over the Western Hemisphere, flocked to Grenada to watch this revolution in action. This is a photograph of Angela Davis at the left, who had rushed down there to see this new process unfold. Grenada established close relations with the Cubans, and after a number of provocations and internal sort of conflicts that emerged at the highest levels of the revolutionary movement, these were used as pretext for another U.S. invasion in 1983, Operation Urgent Fury, in which the Marines once again were sent in to crush a revolutionary example that they perceived to be, spreadable. This was very much part of the Reagan doctrine at the time, something that Greg Grandin calls the Reagan doctrine. This was in some ways the exercising of their failed counterinsurgency strategy in Vietnam, right? To sort of really pick on little Grenada. But we should take the US's intervention in a little place like Grenada as not only a sign of weakness on U.S. foreign policy, of which it absolutely, in my view, was, but also a testament to the true example that some of these processes, these popular processes and experiments in the region actually work. How groundbreaking and threatening could such a small revolution be to U.S. foreign policy? We really should take these things on their own terms. And this backwards and forwards between radical alternative U.S. intervention, radical alternative U.S. intervention. It's never really stopped. It's never been something that has been changed. Even, and this goes beyond the Republican or the Democratic Party, right? This is not a Republican versus Democratic thing. Neither party has particularly broken with this long-standing tradition, this back and forth. The most recent iteration of this has really been, the emergence and more recent rollback of the so-called pink tide in the late 90s and early 2000s, after the period of military dictatorships and civil war, after the supposed return to democracy. You had this emergence of a new kind of anti-corruption politics, a new kind of leftism, really. What in Venezuela they were initially calling socialism of the 21st century, where you had new social movements of workers, of indigenous people, of women, working in popular coalition with various political parties to bring left of center economic nationalists back to power. People that have, a lot in common with Jacobo Arbenz from, the early 1950s. I can think of no better case than Evo Morales, right? The Bolivian president, the first president of the Republic of Bolivia, who comes from an indigenous background, right? One of the first political leaders that looks like his population, the population that he leads. And these various movements, particularly the most famous, I would argue, is the movement of Hugo Chavez Bolivarian Socialism, that in the early 2000s really begins to shake up politics in Venezuela. There was this wave of left of center democratic politicians to come to power, who began talking about regional unity in ways that they hadn't seen in such a long time that we the likes of which we haven't seen since the Tricontinental Conference. The only difference being these were governments in power. And that alternative was no more acceptable than what came before. And what you see is more recently interventions and rollbacks on those governments. So in taking stock of all of this, right? This because, like I said, this is a very surface level, superficial look at the evolution of the relationship between the United States and Latin America. I just want to reiterate that many of these tropes don't go away. We're still saddled with them. We're still using this language of the banana republics, of the United States being the beacon of democracy in the region, and all of this is built on the ashes of these interventions, and these tropes continue to be used. I mean, I chose these two cartoons, because I think they're quite telling. You see, you know, the Uncle Sam teaching, the young Cuban boy about self-government in the same way that, the cartoon of President Bush is to a young Iraqi, in the early 2000s. These aren't things that are just forgotten, right? These are tropes that are continually deployed and strategies that really haven't been updated since the turn of the century. And I think that it's important for us to engage with them so we can more effectively teach this history to our students, because the harvest of empire is upon us, right? Demographically, the United States is changing. There are more Latin Americans in the United States now than there ever has been. And so there are people in this country that come from places with a long-term memory about these events, and they should be taught.